Hello there. Time for another video today. And by another video today, I mean my only video today. I kind of forgot to do one, so here we go. I got some milk, and I shall discuss Machiavelli and the dark triad personalities. Seeing as how Machiavellianism is one of the dark triad traits, I felt it made sense to lump the two in together. So, down here we shall discuss the dark triad. But first, let us address Machiavelli. Now, for those who don't know the basics of Machiavelli and his political theory, he wrote The Prince. And what's important about The Prince is that he advised rulers to be basically immoral when necessary, but still have an appearance of kindness. He argued that trickery, cruelty, and just general brutality were all acceptable so long as it maintained order and power in the state. Now, that being said, that does not mean Machiavelli endorsed wholesale slaughter. A lot of people interpret it as Machiavelli endorsing just sheer unbridled brutality upon the people, but it is worth noting, pretty much all of Machiavelli's theories center around the idea of being feared, but not hated. Now one might ask, what's the difference here? And it's very simple. When you fear someone, you fear consequence. You fear the result of an action. For example, when you hear that if I break the law, this will be the punishment, you fear the consequence. Hatred is a different beast. When you hate something, you want it removed and gotten rid of. For example, if you hate a tax, you want that tax abolished and don't even care about breaking the law usually in order to disincentivize it. And so while people must fear your reprisal, they should never hate you. You must be a skilled administrator as a prince in order to successfully rule in Machiavelli's world. Now there's another thing that, to my knowledge, Machiavelli does not address, but should be noted. Loyalty is a great prize. Because here's the thing, well, yes men and flatterers are one thing, and they should be safely ignored, because they are not relevant to proper management of a society. Loyalty itself is the most beneficial thing a prince can have. You don't need to manipulate a loyalist. A loyalist will stand by his side for whatever reason. Maybe it's because you pay their bills and they need the money. Maybe it's because they ideologically agree with you. Maybe it's because you share a religion. Or maybe it's just because you've lived together for a long time. But they trust you. Their loyalty to you is unquestioning. And they can be safely cared for without much worry. Because they are less likely, if almost certain, to not betray you. As a result, loyalty is the most important thing to a ruler. Without it, you have a bunch of backstabbing traitors who must be constantly suppressed and controlled in order to make sure that the state functions. However, loyalists can be trained, baited, and raised properly to ensure they can fill a necessary role. You can always teach someone how to manage a tax form. You cannot teach someone how to be loyal. That is something that comes through experience and just natural existence. You cannot force someone to be a loyalist, but you can definitely train someone to be skilled enough to fill a role. And so loyalty is very important, especially for the ruler. The prince, in his role, must be safe and trusting of those around him. If he cannot be trusting, then people need to be replaced. Because otherwise, he can get backstabbed. And since there are a lot of people who could see the benefits of stabbing the prince, that cannot be tolerated. To add on to this, and how I would argue, moral virtue is a blessing to the weak. This is because, for the weak, they are not the ones playing these games. If you are a person down lower on the totem pole, you're not the one trying to gain power for the most part. Usually you're just trying to survive. Having virtue in such a situation is good because it builds trust, thus loyalty, and maintains their social network. However, general virtue, not in the Machiavellian sense, but in how we view it, can hurt the powerful. This is because when you have a lot to lose, pulling yourself out there and ensuring that others are taken care of can result in you being betrayed and thus losing what power you have. And so, naturally, it is in a prince's interest to essentially fill his government with those who would be classified as weak, those who are virtuous but lack the ambition or the ability to gain further power. Because the virtuous build trust, and trust is gold. If everyone's loyal and trusting, then you have a simple situation where your floor is solid. You can build up the walls and the roof as necessary through your own cunning, but you don't have to worry about the floor falling under you. That is the thing. Yes men are not beneficial, however, loyal and trusting people are. As a prince, you want those under you to trust your leadership and your guidance. You want them to essentially not be of the vulgar masses who just buy appearances, but rather stay with you, good or ill, because they value you as a person or your ideas. And so, morality reinforces order. Yes, Machiavelli is right. Brutality is sometimes necessary. If there is a riot, and that riot is killing people, destroying property, and causing chaos within the state, it is often necessary to engage in brutality to ensure that riot ends, to protect the people and their property, and to ensure stability and order. However, following that, one must be moral. Brutality is a one-time thing. It is to sweep the board, to clear it out and remove any potential threats to one's rule. After that, however, one must be charitable and be, a moral person. Now, generosity, as Machiavelli points out, isn't always the best, simply due to the fact that it requires higher taxes to sustain itself. However, a moral generosity, where one encourages such things rather than doing it themselves, is a great blessing to the state, because they don't need to raise taxes, but things still go out to people and they're still helped. Think about charities. How many people have they saved? Have they made lives better for? Plenty. And they are far more financially efficient than even the state. And so, encouraging charitable giving, saying, hey, we'll help some charities, in exchange you charities help these people over here, allows for more people to have a good life, and more order to be maintained because people trust each other. If people believe that their neighbor is willing to hand them food if they need it, that they're willing to help out when times get dire, then they're less likely to be paranoid. They're less likely to worry because, hey, my neighbor's nice, he'll help me if necessary. You want them to believe that people are not conniving tricksters, because if they believe that, then paranoia seeps in. Paranoia is the last thing you need in a underclass, because that is what leads to fear that escalates to hatred. Fear can be good in moderation, but too much often leads to hatred. If you believe that the prince will strike you down for merely disagreeing with him, you will hate him. He'll be a tyrant and you'll feel justified in stabbing him in the back. However, if the prince is completely ruthless with enforcing the law, but still keeps taxes low, helps charities, it allows people to live good lives, you're not going to screw with him, because sure, stepping out of line will result in your death, but if I don't step out of line, I got food, I got family, I'm good. There needs to be a reason for people to not hate you. Morality is that reason. To strengthen the public morality is to strengthen order because people trust. And if they trust, then they will love you. Because you, to them, look like a moral arbiter, someone worthy of putting their trust into. However, they still should fear you. There is no question there. They should fear the consequences of their actions if they go against you as a leader. This is because, again, even if most people in a moral society will, of course, just follow based on what they benefit from, there will always be a select few who will see any opportunity for a power grab. Basically, imagine Game of Thrones, pick a character. Such people, as they exist, naturally result in, well, murder, destruction, other things that ruin order for the sake of personal power plays. And that helps no one. So how do you keep such people in check? That's where fear comes in. Fear is to keep in check those who would actively threaten a prince's rule. Love and morality is what keeps in check those who will not step up. The weak may back a ruthless candidate if they believe he will help them against you. But that is so long as you are hated. If you are loved by the people, then that is unnecessary. Why would they switch sides when they see clearly that you are a good person and that if they go against you, you'll likely kill them? There is no benefit here unless the threat is astronomically greater. And as such, in such cases where the potential is there, force, in the form of cruelty and brutality, can be employed, or trickery can be employed to weaken a person before it comes to that. Handicapping a person is not a bad thing necessarily if said crippling results in the person no longer becoming a threat and removing them from play. Fact is, sometimes you just gotta remove people from play because you cannot trust them. If a person is willing to overthrow you, and that is made clear, and you know about it, they are not to be trusted under any circumstances. A claimant to the throne that you sit on is not someone you can allow to exist within your state. They must either publicly renounce their claims, die, or leave. Because an alternate claim to the throne means that those who wish to gain power will use that person against you. As a matter of fact, it has happened so many times that it is practically cliche in medieval history. As a matter of fact, a person in Russia died 4 times because people kept saying he was alive and used it as justification to overthrow the Tsardom. 4 times a person's name was brought back from the dead, shoved on a random dude, and used as justification to invade Russia or overthrow the government. I mean, respect the Russians for the commitment, but it's just... Really? The fact is, morality is beneficial. Machiavelli is right to say that things as they are do not lend themselves to pure kindness. He is correct in that without question. What he fails in is recognizing that morality must be encouraged, not just among the prince, but specifically among his people so that the vulgar mass is reduced to a loyal and pious group. Not necessarily loyal to the prince, but loyal to something the prince knows and can use. Basically, morality. If the prince can argue on the basis of morals that people should support him, then he will stay in charge. And as such, the people will maintain themselves. But there's another thing that the prince can use quite effectively to maintain order. And that is, rather simply, liberty. Liberty is the ultimate contract. By promising natural rights and allowing them to be contained, it allows, in essence, a prince to maintain the loyalty of the people in their society while also strengthening their power. Since when everyone's united under a common set of rules, oftentimes things end up resulting in a strong collection of factions. However, liberty, and individualism in particular that comes from it, breaks these factions up. Everyone competes for their own interests. and these small groups can easily be coalesced by a prince as necessary. And that very liberty that they care about can become a rallying cry and uniting force behind the prince when necessary to maintain one's rule. For example, look at the United States. For as cliche as the war for democracy is, that rallying cry that it provides is unquestionably beneficial to the United States. Americans are not united by any sense of the imagination. In fact, there are reasons people call us an empire because of how diverse our people are. However, if it is believed that an outsider is threatening liberty, our way of life, we unite quicker than most peoples, even in totalitarian states. This is because, with liberty, people can get a taste of freedom, that they can hold their property and not have to worry, that they can do something without worry of punishment. And the possibility that that liberty is taken away allows for the brain to imagine all sorts of unfortunate situations which may not come true, but which are useful for propaganda purposes for the main government. And as such, it is easy to unite around the defense of liberty. It thus serves as an easy rallying cry for the people. Overall, Machiavelli had a decent idea behind his beliefs. When you're dealing with ruling, order is more important than mere moral stances and grandstanding. You could preach all you want about morality. That means nothing if you can get a moral result. People do not care about your piousness or how devout you are to whatever religion or idea you believe in. You could be the most firm liberal or the most staunch Protestant out there. It does not matter if your people aren't getting results. But if you bring results, if your miserliness brings a reduction in taxes and thus greater prosperity to the people, if your cruelty results in order and thus less people being harassed by cruel men, and if your trickery allows for the avoidance of conflict which would drag many lives into suffering, that results in morality. But it is not just the morality of results alone that carries it, because you cannot only run morality through results, because there will always be those who will justify results to say that they should do actions that are cruel and unnecessary, those that lead to hatred. The maintenance of morality thus becomes critical for any ruler. Even if, for example, one ruler must take the blame for cruelty in exchange for removing threats from the board and allowing a successor to take their place, clearing the board as they would. Sometimes things are necessary, other times they are not. Recognizing which is important, especially because if it's unnecessary, it is always better to aim on the side of morality. Fortune favors the bold, yes. But more than that, reality favors the pragmatic. And the birth of morality centers around pragmatism. Generosity is good because it helps others and strengthens bonds. Caring for others is good because it builds loyalty and trust. Bravery is good because it allows for defense of that which is important. Virtue is derived from necessary and pragmatic origins, but often gets taken too far. And so, while yes, sometimes cruelty, brutality, trickery, all devious tricks necessary to maintain a state are required, morality is first and foremost a backup plan, if not the main plan one uses when trickery and brutality are not necessary. You don't always need to trick people. Sometimes you just need to rule with an iron fist coated in a velvet glove. Let people see that you are hard on their dissenters, but also see that those who are loyal to you maintain great prosperity. With that, you ensure, in essence, that society trusts you and maintains order. Now, getting into that, let us switch to the Dark Triad and why I included them among this. So, among the Dark Triad, we have, just making sure, let's see. Okay, I just made sure, and they are narcissism. Didn't expect good spelling, because I kind of suck at that. Psychopathy. And Machiavellianism, hence the connection. Now, a lot of people, especially in business, think that these traits can actually be beneficial. This is, however, not true. Or at the very least, the first two aren't. Now, Machiavellianism, to some extent, can be useful. Scheming and manipulation can be useful to set something up. However, the issue with these is simple. These traits don't build trust. You want people to trust you, to be loyal to you, unquestionably willing to serve you. If they believe that you are willing to manipulate and abuse them for the sake of your own ends, they will either leave you or go against you. If you become hated, they will want to crush you. They will want your head on a pike. So it's not good to be mindlessly brutal. You want trust, and often the best way to build trust is virtue. Being kind to people builds trust, a sense of loyalty. An employee is more likely to stay with the boss who is willing to help them with their work on occasion than an employer who just shovels more work in front of them. They are more willing to serve a soldier who is willing to take care of them rather than sending them into the meat grinder without a care in the world. There's actually an interesting thing because both of my parents are actually ex-military, and despite many people not really caring for Bush Jr., both of them highly respect him. Why? Well, there are a number of reasons, but a big one is because he was willing to fly out to the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan and visit them during Christmas. He was willing to take the time out of his day to show them kindness, to show them that he cared. And as a result, plenty of soldiers, even though the wars are not seen as kindly now, plenty of those soldiers who fought in them saw him as a kind person, a virtuous person. Regardless of anything behind the scenes, regardless of what you can say about his political career, Bush Jr. made his soldiers want to fight and stay with him loyally. That is something that few people can attest to in recent history. I doubt many people would say that about Trump. I doubt people would say it about Biden. I doubt people would say it about Obama. Most people nowadays tend to forget that trust is massively useful, especially as a leader. You want people to be willing to follow you, especially if things are not going well, without question. You want complete obedience. How do you get that obedience is the question, and the answer is very simple. Build trust. Give a reason to be loyal. If people have no reason to be loyal, they're more likely to shoot you in the back of the head, especially when it's clear things aren't going well. There's a reason there was a theory that a king was assassinated during a war because his soldiers were tired. Quick context, Great Northern War, Sweden was losing, and it was decades of warfare. And the young king, who they followed to the death due to his bravery and stances against massive opponents, which they won against, was wearing thin. Charles XII is suspected of being assassinated because his soldiers were tired. They didn't trust him and they weren't loyal to him. When things are going bad, there are plenty of people, especially in the military, who are willing to just say, this isn't working, we need someone new in charge, especially if it's your plans they are using. And if it's a single bullet wound away, well, they're more than willing to make that sacrifice. Heck, I'm pretty sure some people joked about shooting Hillary when she was VP just because of how much she annoyed the military. Yeah, let's just say the military doesn't take too kindly to people they believe are basically throwing their lives away. But by being virtuous and building trust, that's less likely to happen. You ensure loyalty. More than that, demonstration of skill maintains an image. It's one thing to say fake it till you make it. There is understandably a belief that if you just put on a show, make people believe you know what you're talking about, they'll trust you and eventually you can succeed in that field, especially as you get more and more people who are actually talented and know what's going on. However, there's a flaw in that logic. As things grow, and especially nowadays with modern technology, we have more and more ways to see how truly skilled one is. And so demonstrating actual skill becomes more and more important. The more people think you are unskilled and lacking ability, the less and less they're going to trust your calls. And thus the less and less they're willing to work with you and follow you. When it comes to maintaining your position, you need, plain and simply, people to trust your image and this idea that people have of you, or that you are trying to instill in others. So you need to truly demonstrate your skill. You can't just rely on faking until you make it. As much manipulation and confidence you have, it does not mean you can pretend to be skilled. You can put on the veneer that you know what you're talking about, maybe. But actual skill, that's a lot harder to fake. And certainly, the vulgar masses fall for a lot of idiotic things. The amount of politicians we have seen that are clearly freaking idiots, but now have political offices that pay six-figure salaries, is, well, how should I put this? If we got rid of all of them from Congress would look like an empty hill. But, despite that, we still need to demonstrate skill, especially in other jobs, like, for example, business. Look at Disney. They had someone in charge who was clearly not skilled. And what happened? They were replaced by someone people in charge knew was, because they were desperate to make money because they had their own interests at heart. Skill indicates ability. The ability to do things efficiently and productively. And that is massively important, especially with large enterprises or states. And so, with that comes an importance of demonstrating it effectively. You can put on all the showmanship you want. That is important in part. But you need to have skill, too. You need to have actual skill to demonstrate, rather than just winging it. And more than that, you need to care. Being detached has its benefits, certainly. But no one cares about a person who doesn't care about them, unless they are in a really, really screwed relationship. In such relationships, frankly, I'd say both sides should break it off, but, I can't force you. I can definitely advise you, but I can't force you. However, the vast majority of people want others to care about them in return for their care. Why should a kid care about a parent if the parent doesn't care about them? Why should a soldier care about what their officer says when the officer clearly doesn't care about what happens in the end? The lack of care that tends to come from psychopathy and narcissism does not help when a person is dealing with those who want reciprocation. If a soldier has to care enough to throw their own life into the meat grinder for the orders of an officer, should they not reasonably expect the officer to give a single iota of care about the person chucking them in? No, they should. But that's the important thing. It's easy to ignore it because you're just giving orders, but you need to care about those under you, and simultaneously, you need to care about those above you. And if there's no reciprocation, the natural response on both sides is usually a breakdown, and thus disorder. order is what is needed, and you cannot have that when everyone's worried about each other actually caring about the other's interests. It is thus very bad to have people indicate that they do not care. Dark Triad has its role in building, specifically in seizing power through brute force. It does not, however, have a tendency to last. Because, let's face it, narcissists are freaking hated by everyone who isn't around them. Sure, you have a few butt kissers, but that's about it. A psychopath who doesn't care appeals alien to most people. And a Machiavellian schema just looks like a giant headache to a lot of people trying to get things done around them. So what you need is cunning, but compassion, virtue. You need to be able to crush a person's legs when necessary, but simultaneously, you also need to be willing to care for those under you if they ever get injured or otherwise taken out of the situation. People are currency, and I say that with the most care I can. What matters is how you spend it and how you use it. You do not want to treat things like they are simply expendable. Sure, you can expend them, absolutely. A life can be lost with the single flick of a pen, the pulling of a trigger. But that does not mean it should be wasted. Resources, like all things, must be used properly. And if you can manage to squeeze the value from that resource as high as possible, you should do it. And you want to know the most productive thing people can be? Loyal, happy, and trusting. You want people to care enough about you or your cause to follow you to heck and back, to not question when you say keep marching. Keep doing what you can. Loyalty. That is the building block of success. How do you build it? Not through cruelty, but through caring while simultaneously maintaining order. If a person tries to hurt those under you, you crush them. If their person under you happens to do good, you praise them. Carrot, stick. You do not only use one, you use both. Cruelty has its place, but it is not the main tool. Because hatred is the quickest way for someone to lose their head. And frankly, I prefer my head being attached to my body, so, tend to prefer not being hated. Though, hey, if you disagree, kill me later. It's not my problem if you lose. Have a good day.